I'm timing this perfectly. I'm going to finish up in a year. Or when I graduate, there'll just be 50 people begging to get me a job, and I'll make $1 million and retire in 10 years. And
Tanner, hi. You're part of Simpline's team and you're a machine learning engineer and data scientist. I'm really curious first about the recent AI hype. In your experience, everything what you see as machine learning engineer, what are common misconceptions people have about AI? Also, how do you manage those expectations when you have to work on the projects or with a client?
yeah, so I can either speak to my recent experience as someone trying to get a job in this, and then maybe we could transition to more about what the job entails. So yeah, it was very fortuitous timing for me to be a graduate around this time of AI hype. Machine learning was definitely growing in popularity when I made the transition to the master. That was a deliberate career move. And then when I was halfway through my degree, ChatGPT came out and all image generators got really popular and the hype was enormous. And I thought, great, I'm timing this perfectly. I'm going to finish up in a year. Or when I graduate, there'll just be 50 people begging to give me a job, and I'll make $1 million and retire in 10 years. And that reality came crashing down pretty quickly. And I think the primary reason is that people, when I was looking for a job, every company wanted someone to either start their AI team, and they wanted someone with 10 years of experience, publications, PhD, that sort of thing. So everyone wants machine learning engineering. Everyone wants AI, even if they might not know how.
It's so in line with Stanford AI Index report. The common misconception is that, oh my God, everyone is hiring in AI, but actually the boom was really in 2022.
Okay.
And then 23 saw across the board, meaning it's not just US, but also other countries having like a dip in demand. From the report, they highlighted that big tech companies cut on their staff and we saw big layoffs. For me, the other one kind of obvious was that people probably already hired their machine learning engineers and built teams in 2022,
Right.
and the demand was not as big as in 2023. What is your feeling why these job positions are down? And yeah, obviously senior positions are in demand.
I think it's probably a combination of factors. I think you are correct in the sense that companies who maybe are a bit more rash with their decisions didn't want to be left behind, didn't want to be left out, and just started hiring like crazy and probably said, we'll figure out what to do with them later. But if we don't hire them, our competitors will. We don't want to be left behind. I think another aspect of it is that a lot of people think AI is like a silver bullet where all you have to do is just hire a couple people like me and say, here's some data, go build something, and then you're going to increase your company revenue by 30%. And that is simply not the case. I think it's a lot harder than companies realize to actually build sustainable value for a company, especially a large company. And this is one of the problems in the industry, and I think one of the problems with how machine learning is taught. I was taught a lot of theory about machine learning and AI, getting down to the nitty-gritty of really how it works, talking pretty high-level linear algebra, calculus, probability statistics, and then theory on how these large models work. And that's all well and good for doing a research project for your degree. It's fine for academia, but in the real world, you need someone who can not only design a model and play around with the parameters until you get a good prediction on your test set, but actually integrate that into a generally pretty sophisticated and complicated company infrastructure. And that is a whole other set of skills that most people don't actually learn in school or really in other applications as well. Because people may go in with very solid knowledge and ability in terms of actually tuning models, they're much more ignorant about how to actually take a model that works and then integrate it into company's software ecosystem and then maintain that model to the point where it can actually produce substantial value for a company that is worth the exorbitant price that these companies are paying. Salaries are quite high as well. The productivity of the modeling has to justify this out.
With us at Simplines that it's in alignment what we saw in really 2023, to be honest, that everyone wanted AI. But what we found that when you come in a company, they have all these existing softwares, all the processes, not really even data strategy in that sense.
Mhm.
And then they're like, oh, just do this magical thing.
Yeah.
And what it becomes that the integration becomes the challenge. I like what you bring up, the integration, because I don't think that's much talked about, because everyone is focused as just machine learning solves everything.
Yeah. And the integration is way more complicated than people, I think, understand. And that's why there's actually a big push in the fields in terms of companies. They want people who are not just data scientists, who aren't just tinkerers with models, but they want people who are also engineers. And I think that's why they're machine learning engineer. A machine learning engineer, not just whipping up a model with PyTorch and getting good results on a predictive task and saying, okay, job well done. To integrate a model into infrastructure means you have to host this somewhere, the same way you host a website. You have to figure out how the data pipeline is going to work. Are you ingesting data continuously, streaming? Is it every now and then? How do you clean the data? How do you store the data? How do you then pass your data to the model? For a lot of companies, the time it takes to make a prediction is critical. May say if you need a prediction fast, that is an engineering concern as well, because a lot of times these models are quite slow. So it's another engineering
Right.
to figure out how are we going to handle millions of predictions at scale and still make sure the customer, the end user, gets a prediction quickly. How do you monitor a model? Data changes over time, and your model was trained on data from a year ago. Eventually, your model performance, there's a good chance it drifts in a negative direction, as in the performance gets worse over time. So how do you make sure you're monitoring the model's predictions, and then do you have a plan for retraining the model? And these are all kinds of things that you don't learn usually at school, maybe a class. You don't learn with other educational resources, but they're arguably more important than being really good at creating a predictive model in the first place.
Before, machine learning engineers would go into academia, like doing research, where all that theory can actually be applied and you can be tinkering with just math problems. But now there is, I think, from 35% to 70% growth for engineers to actually go into industry.
Yeah.
Because this is where money is, this is where compute is, and it's much more interesting. But the traditional education not necessarily prepared for this shift, right?
No, I'm sure it's better at other schools and probably better at institutions that are more geared towards engineering, like engineering institutions. They probably teach you more of these practical skills. Personally, I went to the McGill University, and then I also went to the research institute for my master's called Montreal Institute of Learning Algorithm, called MILA. And both of these institutions care primarily about academia. They are trying to prepare their students to transition after this degree to the next degree in their academic career. So they want to prepare you to do a PhD. They don't necessarily want to prepare you to go take your skills and apply it at a large company, which is why they focus so heavily on the theory and things that are important for publishing scientific papers and less so on the actual practical skills. And I imagine this is not just an issue in institutions I would have, but probably across the board in academia.
As I mentioned to you, that machine learning roles, they actually fell percentage-wise in 2023.
Sure.
The roles that emerged and is actually growing is generative artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, being a skill requirement on a job post. Prompt engineering closely followed that. And what was impressive to me that prompt engineering, there were more jobs in prompt engineering than in generative adversarial networks as a requirement of a skill.
Yeah, that's not necessarily surprising to me. GANs are a specific subclass of deep learning model with specific applications. I'm wondering, maybe a company had used a GAN internally and then HR knew that and just said, okay, you need to be an expert in this job, but it's pretty specific. Whereas prompt engineering, even...
I forget.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay.
I'm keeping this.
I lost my train of thought. Oh, prompt engineering is universally useful for pretty much any job because these models are so phenomenal. Just with a little bit of know how to use them, you can increase your productivity in so many facets of your work with pretty minimal effort. So it's definitely a more widely applicable and universal skill than something as niche as GANs.
What was your kind of intro into prompt engineering? Was it part of your education? Was it existing term around?
It was definitely not a formal part of our education. My education for my master's focused on theory of machine learning, theory of deep learning, developing models of PyTorch, that sort of thing. Personally, I first became aware of it I'd say halfway through my degree. I remember one time I was really struggling with understanding this block of code. And I believe it was a block of code for calculating a prior for a diffusion model that we had to code from scratch in my deep learning. So I was really struggling with it. And my wife just said, can't you just put code in the chat GPT and have it explain it? And I said, I think that works with simple things, but it's, it's pretty high level. It's essentially applied mathematical programming for a pretty complicated mathematical process. I was very skeptical, but I said, what the heck? Let me try it. I put it in. I said, hey, explain it. And I was blown away how perfectly and intuitive I was able to take something so technical, something so daunting and unapproaching to someone like me who has a solid math background, but it's not super advanced compared to people really working in this field. And that was the light bulb moment for me, where I realized, okay, maybe I need to get rid of my notions about what I think can and can't do. And if I believe that it even has a small chance that it can help me with the task, I'm just going to try it. And more often than not, it doesn't always work, but more often than not, it's going to immediately indicate to me that there is some value here. And then you get to the process of, okay, and they're not working because it can't do this, or they're not working because you're not giving it the proper instructions to get it to do. That was personally my progression. So once I got to that point, I said, okay, now I need to get better at telling ChatGPT, which is what I was using, how to help me. And then you start reading stuff. Personally, I've learned a lot from people here at Zen because there's some incredible prompters here. And they really, just when I thought I was getting good at prompt engineering, look at some of the work that these people are doing. And I say, okay, I actually have no idea about these people really know their stuff. They're going way deeper than I possible. And then, yeah, I'd say once you get to that point, you've done the easy stuff, but then you really have to learn the techniques for how to extract that extra. And once you dedicate yourself to learning, even basic prompt engineering can take you way further than blindly typing in a day.
For me personally, prompting ruined my experience with ChatGPT. It completely removed with magic. And I vividly remember that I was asking a question and I just thought, okay, so just statistics. So I'm asked this question once and I got this answer. What if I just ask the same question? Do I get the same answer? And I was just curious how same answer can change. Then I learned about temperature and like top P and stuff like that. But it dawned to me like, okay, so if I'm playing with different settings, but what if I ask the same question 1,000 times? And then I saw hallucinations that magically appear. So I plugged API to Google Sheets and I was just like, same question dragged itself down. And I was like, oh, so it's just almost luck what answer I get, or can I control what answer I get?
Right.
And this was like, I started playing with different variables. I remember we were debating very long. Is it better to say act as the copywriter or act as blog writer? What gives better results? Anyway, so I'm going on tangent here, but
sounds like
it's always for me fascinating to hear people's experience with prompt engineering.
Yeah, but what you were doing sounds like that could be like a master thesis. That's really interesting way to try to break it down and study it and analyze it.